Hello, hello, hello. Jessica Morehouse here, and you're listening to episode 93 of the Mo Money podcast. And my next guest is Fritz Gilbert. He is the founder, the blogger behind the Retirement Manifesto. So as you can deduce, we will be talking about retirement, making the transition to retirement, saving for retirement, and even touching on early retirement, which is, I think, a dream in most of our lives when we're working and just wish we had a little bit more free time to do what we wanted. So I'm very excited to talk about Fritz and pick his brain because he's, very knowledgeable about this subject matter. But before we get to this episode, thank you so much to this episode's podcast sponsor, Lowest Rates. So in case you don't know, Lowest Rates is where you can find, the lowest rates in Canada for your mortgage, auto insurance, life insurance, and more, just like that. Super simple. I've done it to find the best quote for my life insurance, so I highly recommend you check them out too at lowestrates.ca. Once again, that is lowestrates.ca. I will include a link in the show notes so you can find out more details about Lowest Rates. But again, if you are looking for a good rate, which you should always find, you shouldn't just go with the first rate you're offered by whoever. You definitely want to do your research to find the lowest rate on anything that you're getting. Lowest Rates is definitely the website to check out so you get the best deal. So without further ado, here's my podcast interview with Fritz Gilbert from the Retirement Manifesto. Thanks, Fritz, for joining me on the show today.
Hey, a real pleasure to be here, Jessica. I appreciate you having me on.
No problem. I'm excited to talk about a topic that I think a lot of millennials, that's kind of largely my audience, don't really think about, I think maybe as often as they should, which is retirement and early retirement too. I think that sometimes people don't believe that that's a possibility when really it could be, and you are proof of that fact because you are going to retire very soon, right?
Yeah, I'm 53 and I'm looking at probably 55, so I'm going to be out early. And I really have a heart for the millennials. My daughter's 21, and as she's started to move into the career world and making money and things like that, there's so many lessons that apply to retirement, but you can only affect them when you're in your younger working years. So your audience is so perfect for this message around compound interest and the importance of starting early, that I really appreciate you having me on, because as I've written more and more, I've realized how much of the value of later in life financial status is really a result of how responsible you are earlier in your career. So you're reaching a really important part of the population. So
absolutely,
I applaud you. Yep.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I totally agree with what you're saying, because I think retirement is one of those things that lots of millennials don't think is that important to think about now. They have a lot of things that I think they want to check off the list first: paying off student debt first, paying off their credit card bill, and saving up some money so they can buy their first property. Retirement is kind of on the back burner. But just like you said, it's unfortunate that lots of people think like this, because once the younger you start, the better you're off, and it won't seem like such a struggle to save up that big amount of money that you may need to live off of in your older years.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Jessica, something that's really changed. Obviously the student loan thing is a huge issue for millennials. And obviously you're in Canada, and, the property values up there, trying to get into a house, rent versus buy. Those issues are huge issues that, I was fortunate in my generation that I didn't have to face those. But in spite of those headwinds, if you want to call them that, the reality of it is, if you're 25, whatever you want to say, 30, in 25, 30 years, whether you want to or not, you're going to be retired. And you have to take responsibility for that, because, that sand through the hourglass just never stops dropping, and it seems so far away, but being 53 myself now, it passes like the wind. And it's the actions that you take in your late 20s, early 30s that can really favorably impact your situation in your 50s. Can you retire at 55, or do you have to work to your 70? That's predominantly determined by what you do when you're in your late 20s and early 30s. It really is. So
and that
it's
makes
hugely
a big difference.
Important.
Yeah, like 50, retiring at 55 compared to 70, it's like, that may not register right now, but Man, when you turn 55 and you're like, I wish I could retire now,
Exactly.
but now you have another 15 years to work. I bet you wish you'd, saved up a little bit more when you were younger and didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my mission right now is how do you reach people? And I'm especially attuned because of my daughter, obviously, but how do you reach people when they're young enough to really start, and I wrote an article, you guys can look at my blog, that's fine.
Absolutely.
But I wrote the first 6 steps to financial wealth, and it was really written to my daughter. She's 21 years old. She just started her first job, and it's really a heartfelt, here's the first 6 things that I think you should do as you're starting your career. And, she doesn't have to understand all the details of it. I understand a lot of people don't want to individually manage their investments. You don't have to at this age. You just have to get the fundamentals started. You have to automatically start a saving program where it comes out of your checking account. Even if you're paying student loans, you can still launch, $50 a month or whatever over into an RSP, as you call it in Canada, or 401k as we have down here. You can still do the fundamental blocking and tackling without really understanding it. And 20 years later, you're going to be so thankful that you took those steps because that's when you're going to start seeing the benefit of it. So,
well, even in just a shorter amount of time. I mean, I think I started kind of aggressively saving and really putting importance on my personal finances when I was about 24, got my first job, moved out and all that stuff. And it's only been 6 years. I'm 30 and I can see that growth. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm so glad I started saving and, kind of still living like a student when I was 24 and for years after that, because fast forward 6 years, which went by really freaking fast, even 10 years, like from 20 to 30. I still remember my being 20 like it was yesterday. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm 30. How did that happen? And it's one of those things where it's like when you are living in the moment, sometimes it's hard to kind of grasp, but
that's right. I'll tell you something you touched on there too, which is really important, is this whole concept of lifestyle inflation. I think when you're in college, you're dirt poor, you're barely getting by, you're eating, canned stew or whatever you eat. Try to maintain that lifestyle for 5 to 10 years after you start working. I mean, the money's coming in. Hey, you know what? I can handle that car loan. You look at a monthly payment mentality and you can get in trouble really quick. Sure, you can get that new BMW. You're making $40,000 a year. You can afford that payment. Don't let that happen, because once you get caught into that lifestyle creep, you never get out of it. And it's much, much better to kind of force yourself into that college lifestyle mentality and take that difference and sock it away, because you've got time for that to compound and grow. And, you're saying, hey, I'm 30, I've seen this huge growth. Well, you plot that out in any kind of retirement calculator out into your mid 50s or 60s, and the compounding effect is not linear, right? It's exponential. And as you get later in life, that line goes kind of straight up and down. And it's just amazing what the savings will do when you start earlier in your life. So good for you for starting early and doing the podcast and doing the blog and trying to reach out to your peers. That's the point in your life when you can have the biggest impact on your future financial security. So
I'm hoping, and that's kind of, I think, why I'm so passionate about it. Personal finance, but also specifically helping out people like me who are my age, because this is such a critical time for our lives. And that's just, my kind of, I think, mission or one of my kind of new missions, I think, for right now, what I feel very kind of called to do is to help millennials just like me learn. I mean, I have a lot of friends that come to me and they're like, what do I do? Or they're kind of reaching that point where they're about to pay off their student loans, so they don't know what to do with their money now. And they're like, should I open up an RSP?
Yeah.
What's an RSP? And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're 30 and we should absolutely know this, and we should have known this 10 years ago. So hopefully with the combination of you and me and some other awesome people that will grace this podcast, we'll be able to help some people make some good decisions so they could just, live a better life and not have to worry about money. That's the main thing.
That's
it's like
right.
I don't like worrying about money, and I feel like no one should have to worry about money if they have the education and tools to back it up.
Yeah, and I love your motto, money life balance. I think money is important, but it's certainly not the most important. The point is be responsible early. Enjoy your life, but enjoy it in balance. And, that money life balance really captures that. It's an important element, but there's other pieces that you have to take into consideration as well. But don't overlook the money side, especially when you're starting out in your career.
Exactly. So I would love to get more into your story specifically.
Sure.
Have you always been this, I mean, you seem like you've always kind of made the right choices when it comes to your money and your career and everything like that. So were you always good with money? Was it something that you were always very passionate about? And
let let me run you through that because I think it's a good story. I remember when I was.
I think it's a good story too. That's why you're on the show.
And we talk about millennials. Well, there's no difference between I'm a baby boomer, right? So I'm mid-50s. There's no difference between us and millennials than 20, 30 years. So 20 or 30 years ago, you could say I was a millennial, right? I was your age, and I've lived that life. And if I look back at when I was in that age bracket. I started out in my childhood. I guess my parents were very middle class. My parents were both teachers. My dad taught at a university. My mom taught in the public schools. So we had a very modest lifestyle. And I was never wrapped up in the materialism. I was never, our family was never caught up in having the latest and greatest. We lived comfortably, but we didn't live extravagantly at all. And I've been very blessed with a wife that had a very similar upbringing and very similar values for money. So that was a huge part of it. And then as I got out of college, I was very fortunate. My dad being a university professor, he had one of his benefits was that I could get free tuition at a variety of colleges that were in this network. So I basically got through college without any debt, which was
that's great.
Huge. My parents paid for me for whatever was left in it, and I've returned that favor to my daughter now, and I've paid for her college. My wife and I have. So, we're kind of paying it back, right? Which I think is great. So I got out of college with no debt. I landed a job with a major Canadian company, so I do have a connection with Canada, and I go to Quebec quite a bit. I'm in the aluminum business, so I spend quite a bit of time in Canada. And I started at 21 years old, right out of college. Good job, and I've been with one company for 31 years now. Wow. And for my very first paycheck, I remember we have the 401k here. It's similar to the RSP. I signed up for the 401k. My very first paycheck, they took 15% out, and I've been saving that plus. Basically every year when I get let's say you get a 3% raise, well, I'll take 2% of it and I'll add it to my savings contributions, and I'll let 1% trickle into my checking account. So you always increase your savings rate as your salary goes up, and that kind of naturally controls that lifestyle inflation we were talking about earlier. So I've been doing that for 31 years, and I'm very fortunate to still have the traditional pension. I realize those are gone, but I've got the pension, and I spent 31 years with one company, so that's created quite a bit of value. But combining saving 15 to 20% of my salary since I was 21, combined with a traditional pension, I'm in pretty good shape, and I've had a good career. It's been a great great variety. I started in customer service, moved into sales, moved into operations, moved into supply chain. Now I'm in procurement. So I've had a full, a real nice move in our company through a lot of the different functions, and I've had a lot of nice promotions. We've moved 9 times. I've moved all around the country, and it's been a really good run. But the principles that we're talking about here are principles that I practiced, when I was 21, 22, getting out of university and starting my first job. So I practice what I preach, and I really did, implement the things that I'm suggesting that millennials implement today. They're examples that I'm drawing from my personal life, and now I'm looking back at it from my mid-50s and saying, man, I'm so thankful I did that, because now I'm seeing the benefit of it, So
exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I think, just like you mentioned, you are kind of proof of what you're teaching. You're a great example. And the crazy thing, though, is what you did when you were 20 is exactly what 20-year-olds right now should do. So things haven't changed that much. So at the end of the day, personal finance, being smart with your money isn't rocket science.
That's right. And actually, you'll like this. I'm writing a blog. You'll see it. It'll probably come out next week. But it's Yoda. Yoda from Star Wars.
Yeah.
He's such a weird little character, right? But a guy put a comment on my blog about Yoda, and he put some comments in there, some of Yoda's quotes, and I was like, that's interesting. So I Googled Yoda's quotes, and this guy had so many really awesome quotes that are so applicable to personal finance. He's 800 years old, right? He's it's goofy. It's a funny little blog. But the principles are not new, right? They've been around a long time, and it's just a matter of prioritizing them in your life and not getting caught up in materialism and not spending all your money going out with your friends and running to the bar and spending a bunch of money on drinks and dinners out. It's financial responsibility, and start it at a young age and let it compound over time, and you'll be fine. But, it's pretty much that simple. Spend less than you make. And do it for a long time, and you'll be fine.
Exactly. So. And I think the thing that also some people may not believe or understand is just because you kind of have this routine of saving and living frugally and all that stuff, this shouldn't really affect your quality of life. I mean, I've lived pretty, like we've been living on a budget for as long as I can remember, and this is just how it is. You get used to it. But our quality of life is great. I mean, let's be honest, like I work downtown, we live downtown, we eat out probably more than most people do. We have all the things that we really need. And if we really want something, we could afford to buy it in cash. Do we go out every weekend? No, we're very strategic in how we spend our money, but it doesn't really make me more or less happy,
Yeah. And I think that's where, this whole perception that, if you're financially responsible, then you're frugal and you're living in a cave, and these really just foul misperceptions. It doesn't have to be that at all. My wife and I, we went to Norway last summer. My daughter's 21, but as she went through school, we'd take European vacations every summer. I have frequent flyer miles. We'd do it economically, but we'd find ways to really create valuable life memories. You don't have to live so that you're not enjoying life. You can accomplish both, and it's very achievable. The trick is to not let your expectations for material wealth get ahead of where you're actually at in terms of your financial earnings. You've got to live within your means, but you can live very enjoyably within your means if you manage your expectations, and that's really what it's all about.
Exactly. And if you want to buy something that's beyond your means, kind of the trend that's going on in my generation is just get another job or find another income stream. So make more money.
I gotta love the whole side hustle thing. My blog, I'm not making any money on it yet. Maybe I will at some point, but I'm not doing it for money. I'm doing it to try to share the lessons I've learned. But
absolutely,
I read a really good article. I'll send it to you if you do show notes or anything. You can blow it in there. But this guy had written 143 ideas for side hustle income, and it's on Instagram. There's a web post about it. And the reality of it is, with technology and all the internet type stuff, and blogging is so easy. There are so many ways. I work full time. I write my blog. You and I are doing this podcast interview. You work full time. We're doing all of this in our spare time, and there are so many opportunities for people to do a little side hustle. And if you pick the right one, that's something you're really passionate about, it's going to give you a lot of enthusiasm for life, and it might turn into something where it actually creates more money than your real job, quote unquote. And then you turn that into a full-time living where you've got that entrepreneurial spirit, but you can do that while you're still working and generate these things and run them for a while. That was never available when I was your age, and that's a huge plus, I think,
pretty huge
for millennials. It's huge. Yeah. It's phenomenal what's out there.
Absolutely. I think we, sometimes maybe see it as a drawback that we may need a second job or second stream of income to kind of be able to afford living in the city or, buying a place. I mean, houses are just crazy expensive no matter where you live these days compared to, the baby boomers generation. But then again, it's kind of easier to make money in some respects as long as you don't mind being a bit creative or, spending that extra time not watching TV. Like, really.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah. And, TV is such a brain suck. I mean, you spend 3 hours a night in front of the TV. That's 3 hours that you could have been out generating income. And if you find something that you like to do, I mean, you like to write, obviously. I like to write. I mean, you find something that you like to do. It's entertaining at the same time that it's generating income, whereas something like watching TV or, non-value creating things, sure, it can be entertaining, but you can find entertaining things that also create income. There's a wealth of opportunities now, and just get creative and go out and look for them,
And they're also just good at, like, in my experience, I've been blogging for almost 5 years. I've made some really great friendships out of this.
Yeah.
And I know, for instance, I helped my friend, I hooked her up with a friend of mine. She's a grant writer on the side. I have a friend who's a filmmaker who needed a grant. I hooked them up. And then they worked out, they got the grant, so my friend was able to make her film. They became friends. It was just like kind of a beautiful moment of like side hustles and friendship, millennial style. Yeah. It was just like, this is awesome.
That was, if I think about what I thought I would be getting into as I started my blog. I started my blog in April of 15, so it's been about a year and a half. And my thought was, okay, it'll be really financially focused, and I had all these ideas. Well, it's changed so much since then. I probably write as much now about kind of work-life balance and overall life priorities and things like that as I do about the financial stuff. So that was one surprise, is that really the message that seemed to resonate more with my readers was more about finding a purpose in life and things like that. That was the first surprise. The second surprise was this whole network of fellow bloggers and podcasters and, the connections you make on Twitter. And, I've had lunch with a couple people now that are in my area. I live down in Georgia. I live in Atlanta. And there's a variety of people I hooked up with through Twitter that are, really advanced bloggers and authors. They have published books and, having lunch with these people. And, it's a really fun network. And there's a huge reward and appreciation that you don't expect that kind of comes from that, that network of people that have similar interests. And it's really enjoyable with or without the financial gain. Just that expansion of friendships is really rewarding. It's a lot of fun.
And it's totally free.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's free to do. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Last kind of thing I'd love to know, because you are going to be retiring early, which that's so awesome that you are. Very inspiring. What does retirement look like for you? What do you expect to do during retirement? It seems like you'll probably continue with the blog and maybe make that your kind of side hustle.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jessica. And ironically, I was working out today at lunch, and there was a guy next to me on the treadmill, and we're talking. He goes, aren't you worried about getting bored in retirement? And I'm like, people always say that, hey, if you retire early, you're going to get bored. And I think, is your life your job? There's so much to life beyond what you have to do. And if you're at the point where you can achieve financial independence early, then you have financial independence. You have a choice. I can continue to, I can choose to continue working, not because I no longer need the paycheck, but it's because I choose that's the best place where I'll get the most, rewarding benefit for my time that I invest in it. Or I can choose to do something that, I find more rewarding. And to me, when you think about how long will you truly be healthy and able to go out and do things? And, I love the Canadian Rockies and Banff and Jasper in that area. Okay, so let's just say you want to go, climb one of the mountains out there, and it's a I don't know, a couple 1,000-meter hike. And, how old can you really expect yourself to be able to do that stuff, right? Let's just say 70. So if you work till 60, then any given year that you give up is 10% of your really active life, right? Yeah. It's not 10% of 100 years. It's 10% of those 10 remaining active years that you have. So to me, getting out early is really valuable because those are early years when you're healthy, you can go out and do the things you want to do. So, my wife and I, this is the part of the whole early retirement dream and plan that we've had that's really exciting because you can think about what do we really want to do. And, we've absolutely got plans. We're going to get a fifth wheel. We're going to spend probably 6 months of the year, go up to Alaska for 6 months, go out to the Pacific Northwest. We love BC. I know you're from Vancouver. I love Vancouver in that area. It's wonderful, So I could easily go out to Vancouver Island and spend, 2 months on Vancouver Island. I mean, why not? You're free to do what you want to do. So we've got dreams to do things like that. And what we might along the way. Financially, I don't think we're going to need to, but if we choose to kind of work a seasonal job somewhere, maybe work in a national park for a summer, for the social network and connection as much as anything else, great, we'll do that. We're open to those types of options, but they're not going to be driven by financial need. It's going to be driven by, hey, let's decide to do this for a while, and financial will be the last consideration, which is really, a really nice place to be, at this stage in life. So
absolutely, I love the idea of being financially free enough to do exactly whatever you want, pretty much.
Exactly,
and then choosing to work. Which, like for me, it's when I think of retirement, I certainly don't think I'm going to be on the beach. Like sometimes I daydream about being on the beach with a pina colada, but that would be like a week, and then I'd get bored. So exactly. I would absolutely I'd find some other, passion, some kind of, I'd probably still work, but I'd probably do whatever I want to work in. So be my own boss, so to speak.
And that's kind of, and that's why I did start the blog. Part of what as your listeners, I mean, they're young, but, just remember this, park it in your brain, and 30 years from now, when you get to be in your 50s or whatever, think about it. As you get to within a few years of retirement, one of the things that I think is really important is to start to develop these other interests that might turn into things that give you a purpose in retirement. So the whole purpose, for starting this blog was, hey, let's experiment. Let's figure out how this works. I got some good good ideas to share, that's fine. But really the goal was to create a platform that can live post-retirement. And you start building these platforms, be it charitable work. You know, my wife and I, we live up in the mountains, right where the Appalachian Trail starts. So we're up in the North Georgia mountains. And we started like on the weekends, you know, I'm up there and we started getting involved in some of the charity organizations. And we're starting to try to, you know, vet out some of those areas that might turn into post-retirement, you know, things that we decide to get involved with, because you don't want to wait till you get to retirement and then suddenly go out and start looking. You start looking before you get there, right? I mean,
exactly.
You know, you want to have those ideas drawn out and really have an idea of what you're going to get into. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It's a lot of fun. We're enjoying it.
Well, I'm excited to hear about how retirement goes in 2 years. I'll follow up with you. I'll follow up with you before that, but
yeah, please do. You know?
I'm excited to know, you know, how it is. That's very exciting.
And you know what's really fun? I just did a article about, it was called Retirement Expectations versus Reality, and one of the things I wrote about in there is, you know, as you're thinking about retirement, it's a really interesting stage in your life because by definition, you can't know what retirement is until you're retired, right? Yep. So it's one of those future states that you're trying to imagine in your mind, but you can't really imagine what it's going to be like. It's kind of like when you're in university and you're trying to think about what's that first job going to be like. You don't really know until you get into your first job, right? And retirement's kind of the same thing. You're trying to imagine what's that retirement going to be like, and inevitably when you get there, it's going to be different than you expected it to be. So what I've started to do now is I've had quite a few guest bloggers and things like that have come in and written on my site that have gone through that transition, and I'm trying to encourage them, hey, share your lessons as you went through this transition. What were some of the things that, you know, you didn't expect that, you know, you can advise those of us who are still a couple years away, so that when we get there, we're kind of more ready for some of those unexpected transitional things. And you know, there's so much stuff to write about. And, you know, I don't just write about retirement. I mean, for your audience, you know, as I mentioned, I wrote this article for my daughter. I write about all areas of personal finance that ultimately affect retirement, but so many of those areas, if you haven't done them by the time you're 35, you know, you've kind of missed a huge opportunity. Yeah. So there's a really, really important part of this that is directly at your audience, and that's start early, you know, live below your means, force yourself to automate your savings, and just get that piece done right. And you've conquered 90% of the challenge. You know, that's the challenge at your age right now, is to live below your means and automate the savings on the balance of it, and you'll be fine. That's really the message.
And it's a very good message. So thank you so much, Fritz, for joining me and sharing your wisdom. And that was episode 93 with the wonderful Fritz Gilbert from the Retirement Manifesto. Make sure to check out more info about him in the show notes, jessicamorehouse.com/93, or check out his fabulous website, theretirementmanifesto.com. He has a bunch of great resources about retirement that you may want to check out. And thank you again to today's podcast episode sponsor, Lowest Rates. Thank you so much for supporting the Mo Money podcast. You will probably want to go to lowestrates.ca right now in case you are currently looking for the lowest rates on, say, a mortgage, auto insurance, life insurance, and more. Just like that, it is the easiest thing you can do to save money. I am telling you, I did it myself. Love their website. They also have a really good blog in case you want to learn more about how to find the best deals and save money and just live a financially savvy life. So make sure to check them out at lowestrates.ca. We'll include a link to them in the show notes and a bit more information about what they are all about. And of course, I will also include a link to, or you can just, if you're on iTunes, just check it out. Episode 79 is one in which I interview Lowest Rates CEO Justin Thuen. He is super, super knowledgeable when it comes to personal finance and rates and credit and all of this